Greetings, YouTube. I recently finished reading the book Death in Yellowstone, and the book is about, you guessed it, death in Yellowstone. And it got me thinking that I haven't seen many real-world dangers from nature in role-playing games all that often. Once in a while you'll find situational things, but there are day-to-day risks and encounters that I think adventurers should be having in their lives as they travel from point A to point B, particularly through the wilderness or even virgin territory, which does happen occasionally. Let's face it, most sylvan forests are close to what we would consider untouched forests, and the chapters are somewhat extensive. There will eventually be a review of this book in detail. It's very, very pedantic. It often reads almost like actuary tables. You have to have the ability to slog through a lot of names and ages and where they're from and death after death after death, and it is occasionally very depressing. But the first sections are death by nature, and it's death by nature and then death by man. So in the death by nature, which is really what I'm talking about in this video, death in hot water, which deals with the dangers of thermal activity on the surface, so hot springs. Now, some hot springs are safe to be in, and they're natural wonders, and they've attracted people from around the world. They even attract monkeys. But they're also deadly if they go above a certain temperature level. I couldn't even finish reading this chapter. Reading about children being boiled to death was not something I could stomach. It's a real danger. Now, also very situational, but remember, adventurers often go into the Underdark. And the Underdark is going to have a higher concentration of unusual encounters than would the surface world. So there's a better chance, I think, of you encountering hot spring activity in a much more up-close and personal way than you would encounter on the surface. So I think those types of encounters, whether on the surface or in the Underdark, are real danger. It makes at least one encounter in an adventurer's career path. Sometimes you want to have more than once. You don't want to have it every adventure, but over the arc of an entire campaign, you might want to have the same type of encounter once or more than once, because you can show character growth that way. I can remember when we encountered this the last time, that kind of a thing, and I know they will then know how to handle a situation they didn't know the first time. It gives the players and the characters a sense of growth, and that they've accomplished something and they've learned from their mistakes, or at least the living ones did. Those animals are not real. The myth that can kill you. Right, some people, for some reason, seem to think that the animals in Yellowstone are tame, or they put them in cages at night or something. No, they're out there for real. Now, we've all had encounters of animal types in adventures. Wolves and bears are very popular. And I'm not talking about monsters here, just the ordinary, everyday animals. But other animals can be a nuisance. They can destroy equipment, or they can, in large numbers, can be a risk to a person. But one of the things I don't remember ever seeing is the aftermath. Just stumbling upon a scene of a death, that the animal that killed the person isn't there. Just a dead person, or what's left of the dead person. And how much meat a grizzly can eat is astounding. Like in a 24-hour period, eating 70 pounds of a human. One bear. That's astounding. But at a low level, the animal, of course, is a risk. But the treasure gained from such an encounter, even if it's just camping gear, could be very important to the party, particularly if it's a survival situation. If you've put the characters into an environment where they have little or no gear, encountering someone else's camp and being able to scavenge what they left behind could really be a boost to the players. So I think that's kind of important and interesting. Then we have, see, death by bears, right? How to eat wild parsnips. Death from poisonous plants. Now this is where your survival skill comes into play, and I think it should be important that maybe you're when you're secretly rolling for that, you haven't failed, and they picked the wrong plant, and maybe it makes the entire party sick. And maybe somebody has how you roll to see how most people just think, hey, I don't feel that great, but maybe one person has an allergic reaction and learns the hard way, I should not eat plant X because it will make me very ill. For example, I can't pet sheep because they have lanolin and I am allergic to lanolin. Processed wool, a-okay. Raw wool makes my eyes burn, and wool on a sheep, my entire head explodes in mucus. It isn't fun. But I didn't find that out until I did it the hard way. So maybe something that the party encounters because someone failed a survival check puts their lives at risk. And again, good for a low-level party if they don't have any way of neutralizing poison. Noxious fumes and death from poisonous gas. And again, this is going to be something you're going to find around hot springs or underground. Again, underground at a higher concentration, literally and figuratively, of such encounters. Very dangerous and silent. Not necessarily explosive gas, just dangerous gas. Some gases are also explosive. So there's the risk of that. It's good. One of the good reasons for players to be using non-flammable light sources like continual flames or light spells, things like that, because those aren't going to spark something off. Very dangerous to have that happen when you're in a confined space like an underground tunnel. Freak fatalities, death from lightning. Now this is a cool one. Now we've seen lightning used in fantasy games. Call lightning even, where you're literally calling a lightning strike down from the sky like Thor does. But have you ever had the characters stumble upon a body in the forest that died of a lightning strike? Obviously not something you're going to want to do every encounter, but having it doing it once could be a wonderful mystery. And if somebody who has a knowledge nature or a survival skill rolls well, it could give them a sense of accomplishment because they figured out why this person's dead. You describe it to them, for example, the dead body, and there's burn marks on it, and there's a hole in the bottom of its shoe, or the electrical pathway blew right through the body and it killed the person. They may be able to figure out, even without a roll, that this person died from this way. And maybe, because it's a world of magic, that means that they can harvest things from this body, or just the body itself could be used in some magical ritual. Who knows? Hair from a person killed by lightning, something like that for a spell, or something for a magic item. Lying in the snow, deaths from avalanche and freezing. Now, I've had hypothermia be a danger in campaigns more than once, but I've never used an avalanche. And avalanches are real, and they're a threat to people who are traveling in the backcountry, because a party can trigger one without knowing they're triggering it. And suddenly it comes barreling out of nowhere, moving like a literal freight train. And it's a massive danger. And lots of people do not make it out of avalanches alive. And you can have it so that, the player characters are not put at a risk of death, or you can put them at the risk of death. Somebody makes a really bad save in their attempt to get out of the way, or to ride up and swim up towards the surface or something. They don't make it. They can roll really poorly, or you roll really poorly for them if you don't want them to know what the saving throw is, and you start ticking it off. Your character is suffocating, or your character is just freezing to death. What are you doing? Your character can breathe right now, but what are they going to do to get out? They can't move. So that could be a real danger. And it also would show that you're willing to take somebody out in that manner. It's obviously, some GMs don't want to do that to player characters, and I can completely understand that, because this is an event that it's an act of nature, so maybe you don't want them to be killed by an act of nature, but maybe you're running grim and gritty. Maybe acts of nature kill you. Um, Death by cave-in. Now, cave-ins are a risk if you're either on the surface. They actually talk about one poor sod who just had a rock ledge fall on him. It wasn't even a cave, really. It was a rock ledge over him. Just literally in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this whole thing just collapsed. Squished. Fast, at least. Didn't know it was coming. But if you're doing caving, that's a much greater danger. And of course, what is spelunking into the Underdark? It's caving. So rock slides and cave-ins are a real risk, particularly if your party is using spells that produce a lot of kinetic energy. You're setting up vibrations. Lightning spells, for example. That may very well trigger a cave-in of some variety. That's a lot of energy being released all at once, and it's producing a big boom, and big booms can cause collapses. Missiles from above, death from falling rocks. Now, we've all had ogres and giants chucking rocks at people, but what about just rocks coming out of nowhere? You're just traveling through the forest, and you're near rocks outcroppings that are above you, but you don't see anything, you don't hear anything, and all of a sudden a rock just comes barreling down the mountain and towards your party, and everybody roll a saving throw, and the guy that fails gets clipped or hit directly by a rock, which is quite powerful. I mean, even if it's a rock the only size of my head, moving at speed, it hits you anywhere in the body. In the real world, you're dead or broken so bad that unless you get immediate medical attention, you're dead. Of course, things are a little more, cinematic in most games, so that's not quite likely to kill you, but you could break somebody very badly and have that be part of the game. Your cleric is now broken to the point where they're alive, but they can't help you or themselves. What do you do? I think that I shall never see Yellowstone deaths from falling trees. Now, I remember I read a book not long ago about redwoods, and one of the things that was interesting is that people climb them and to explore the biodiversity that's in the trees themselves, and they camp in them. They literally camp on the side of these trees in special hammocks and such. And they did this, and like 2 or 3 weeks later, the tree they had been camping in fell over. And they had no idea that tree was not healthy. That literally, it was hollow at the bottom. And the wind hit it right one night, and crack, a redwood falls down. So that's terrifying, particularly in a fantasy game where you have lots of things living in trees. Elves do it all the time, though elves would also probably be aware of the health and condition of trees. But other people wouldn't necessarily be. But then you've got just widowmakers, branches falling out of the sky, and the branches can be substantial in size and quite dangerous. Even if you're not doing logging, they can still fall in storms, or because of storms. The storm makes the branch just kind of hanging up there. You don't see it, and boom, kinetic spell of some variety, or just unlucky, and a branch falls down and injures someone or kills them. Fatal attractions, death from falls. Now, falling them itself in some games, in many games, you have the right kind of access to spells, is much less dangerous. And monks, for example, can slow down their falls significantly just because it's one of their class features. But lots of people can't. Falling damage is a danger. And if you're in nature, falling can happen all the time. I know of cases in Hawaii, for example. Sorry, I have a cat causing me problems right now. Oh yes, cat. Oh yes. One moment, please. One moment. There we go. Sorry, she opened up a window on me. Literally opened up windows on me. It's an instance in Hawaii where the plant matter can actually grow out over a cliff edge, and so it looks like it's forest floor. And you walk over this, what you don't know is a porous net of roots, and all of a sudden, hundreds of feet straight down. you don't walk that one off. Death from forest fire, smoke chasing can kill. I can't remember often seeing forest fires. I think I've only ever used a forest fire once. But in the right territories, particularly if it's dry season, and you have a lightning strike, or the characters are using fire or lightning strikes, like your party ranger or druid may have said, sorry, God, I've got cat hair everywhere. May tell them, don't use these kind of spells, but who listens to that? Look at aliens. They didn't listen about their pulse guns, now did they? So that could be a real danger. Not just starting themselves, but the players could be just camping, and all of a sudden the fire starts heading towards them. And since it's nighttime, they wouldn't see the smoke. By the time they notice the flames, they could be in severe danger. Oh, God, this cat, you're driving me nuts. Yeah, I should down there looking. The gloom of earthquakes, shaky, breaky park. Now, earthquakes, if you're on the surface, aren't that dangerous. Literally, if you're not near a building or trees, an earthquake is not a danger. It's riding a wave, and you're not going to be put into danger. But if you're spelunking in the Underdark, an earthquake is a real danger. If you're near trees or rock formations that may then missiles rolling down the hill, or overhangs cracking and falling, things like that. So an earthquake can be very dangerous, and player characters can create those with high-level spells. Danger in the water, deaths from drowning. Now this is something I think we've all had, drowning, but one thing I don't think many people have appreciated is how dangerous cold water is. Now they talk about some of the high-altitude lakes in Yellowstone. They're at like 7,000 plus feet. And it can be June or July, and the water temperature can be 38 degrees, which is not warm. Sorry, cat is not helping again. And within 20 minutes, you start to freeze to death in that. You have to get out of that water or get to shore. And they talk about these lakes where they'll be calm in the morning, but in the afternoon they can get winds and then storms where you can have a lake with 5-foot waves, which very easily tips over boats, and not to mention canoes, which is probably the most likely type of boat that player characters are going to encounter in the wild, unless they're at the sea coast, So if you're in the mountains, you're going to be having access to canoes to get from point A to point B, because it is very efficient, especially if you're moving heavy materials. But if you get turned over and you don't get out of that water, you die. And if you're trying to swim to shore in a headwind with 5-foot waves, you could be only 200 feet from the shore, and you may not make it. These things really happen, and sometimes people go out into lakes and they're gone. Nobody ever sees them again. It's happened. So these are all just the ways you can die by nature. Then they get into battles, deaths from fights, death from diving. That's a real thing. People diving into water that was not deep enough. That's something that a player character could do. Death from horses, wagons, and stagecoach incidents, all of which exist in fantasy games, and all of them are dangerous. And I don't remember the last time I thought of a horse, wagon, or stagecoach encounter that was dangerous to player characters, and they can be. Deaths from shooting and self-defense, murders, death from suicides, missing and presumed dead. People just go into the forest and disappear. Harder to do that in a game when you have magic. It's easier to locate people with magic than it is in the real world. Explosions and structural fires, gas stove explosions in particular, but explosions from spells and structural fires are real things and can be a danger to your player characters. Carbon monoxide poisoning also could be a danger if you're using some kind of flame-producing source and you're in an enclosed area, like say a cave or something. Carbon monoxide can be a real issue. Death on the road and in the air, that's more car accidents, bus accidents, plane accidents, those kind of things. So not as likely to encounter that sort of thing in a fantasy game, but it's not impossible. So all of these things could happen in nature, and this book gives me the distinct impression if you go to Yellowstone, you will die. Um, I think that these could be interesting encounters in the game. I don't remember having seen most of them used. So I thought I'd talk about it here today, and we can get people talking about what they have encountered in the past, or do any of these ideas spark interest for you in your future campaigns. So let's talk about Death in Nature, read in Tooth and Claw.